What if I told you that Jim Crow never really died? It just changed clothes. That the same legal tricks that once enforced segregation still shape who gets to vote, who sits on a jury, who owns land, who breathes clean air, and even who gets fast internet.
And racism still exists. It hasn't left, it's only elevated. There's a book called The New Jim Crow, you know what I'm saying? If you live in Grand Rapids, it's still segregated. There's no difference. You know what I'm saying? I know when I'm in the black community, I know when I go to East Grand Rapids, I'm in a white predominant community. I know when I go to Southwest, I'm in a Latino or brown community. You know what I'm saying? I know when I go to different sides of town, they're redlining, these red zones.
We like to think of Jim Crow as something buried in dusty history books. A black and white photo of a whites-only water fountain. A grainy newsreel of protesters being beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. But Jim Crow was never just about signs or seats. It was a system, a machine designed to lock one group at the bottom while another stayed on top. And here's the chilling part. Machines don't die, they get upgraded. Today, you won't see whites only painted on a courthouse door. You'll see race-neutral policies written in legal jargon that end up producing the same result. You won't see a Klansman standing with a whip. You'll see a politician standing with a spreadsheet. This is the story of how America perfected the art of recycling Jim Crow, turning yesterday's chains into today's contracts, maps, and data points. Let's begin with something so invisible that most Americans never even think about it. The census. America has always had a way of turning human beings into numbers. But what if I told you the same math that once counted black people as only 3/5 a human being never really disappeared? It just changed its disguise. Today, in quiet rural towns and shadowy political backrooms, a new counting game is being played. One that shifts power, steals representation, and silences millions of black voices, all without a single ballot being cast. In theory, it's simple. Count the people, draw the districts, give each person equal representation. One person, one vote. But in America, nothing involving race and power is ever that simple. Enter prison gerrymandering. This is the story of how mass incarceration and prison gerrymandering became America's modern 3/5 compromise. In 1787, when the Constitution was signed, America faced a question. How you count millions of enslaved black people who were denied every right of citizenship? Southern states wanted them counted fully because it meant more seats in Congress. Northern states resisted, arguing that if enslaved people had no rights, they shouldn't add to Southern power. The compromise? Enslaved Africans would be counted as 3/5 of a person, not whole, not free, but still useful as numbers. That grotesque formula handed the South decades of dominance. Plantation owners held their enslaved people in bondage, then used their bodies, their very existence, to pad white political power. Black lives did not count in freedom, but they counted in representation. Fast forward more than 2 centuries, and the playbook looks eerily familiar. Today, mass incarceration cages over 2 million people in America, the highest prison population in the world. And while nearly every state insists prisoners can't vote when it comes to drawing political maps, suddenly their bodies do matter. Because census rules say prisoners are counted not as residents of their home communities, the neighborhoods they come from, the families they belong to, but as residents of the mostly white, rural towns where prisons are built. That means a young black man arrested in Brooklyn but serving time in a prison upstate disappears from his community's political count. His body is then used to inflate the voting power of the white rural district, holding him captive. Sound familiar? It's a 3/5 compromise reborn. Black bodies stripped of rights, yet weaponized for someone else's power. The scale of this quiet manipulation is staggering. In New York alone, tens of thousands of incarcerated people from Harlem, Brooklyn, and the Bronx are counted in small upstate counties where they have no family, no roots, no future. Towns with barely 5,000 residents suddenly report 7,000. But 2,000 of those are locked inside razor wire, unable to vote. The result? Rural, mostly white voters gain extra representation. Their districts swell in population on paper, giving them more clout in state legislatures and even Congress. Meanwhile, the urban black communities left behind lose seats, lose funding, lose political voice. In Texas, one county drew a district where 40% of the population was incarcerated. Imagine that. Thousands of people behind bars, voiceless, but counted as if they were loyal voters of the very officials who helped keep prisons filled. In Illinois, entire towns survive economically only because a prison is there. Census data counts the prisoners as residents, pumping up local numbers. Politicians in those towns fight desperately to keep prisons open, not just for jobs, but for political power. It's a brutal irony. For decades, politicians pushed tough on crime, laws, mandatory minimums, and the war on drugs, policies that disproportionately targeted black communities. They built prisons at breakneck speed in poor rural areas. And then, like clockwork, they use the very bodies they locked away to redraw maps that keep them in power. The system feeds itself. Arrest them, cage them, count them, erase their vote, inflate ours. It's not just about representation. It's about money. Federal funds for schools, hospitals, roads, billions of dollars are distributed based on census counts. When prisoners are counted in white rural towns instead of their urban homes, resources follow the numbers. Black communities lose twice. First their people, then their funding. And yet, this story rarely makes headlines. Why? Because it's complicated. Because it's buried in census language and redistricting jargon. Because it doesn't scream scandal the way voter fraud myths do. But for Black America, the consequences are devastating. It's the reason why neighborhoods that send hundreds of men to prison suddenly have less money for schools. It's why state legislatures skew conservative, even in states where the majority lives in cities. It's why democracy itself feels rigged. Some have fought back. In 2010, New York and Maryland passed laws requiring prisoners to be counted in their home communities, not prison towns. California, Delaware, Nevada, Washington, and others have since followed, but the resistance is fierce. Rural counties argue they need the numbers. Politicians argue that prisoners live where they're incarcerated, and courts, often conservative, have been reluctant to intervene. So today, in most states, the old system still reigns. A system born out of slavery's arithmetic, polished by Jim Crow, perfected by mass incarceration. When Frederick Douglass spoke about the Three-Fifths Compromise, he said it reduced black humanity to a fraction used to enrich the very people who enslaved them. Today, prison gerrymandering doesn't call it three-fifths. It calls it residency. But the outcome is the same. Black people's lives, communities, and futures manipulated for someone else's gain. And just like in 1787, the numbers decide who holds power. But here's the question that should haunt us all. If America is willing to recycle the very arithmetic of slavery, what else has it preserved, hidden under new names? Because prison gerrymandering is only one piece of a larger machine. One that doesn't just manipulate numbers, but erases entire voices. We uncover the next part of the puzzle, how felony disenfranchisement laws, born in the ashes of slavery, still strip millions of black people the right to vote today. Stay with me, because the deeper we go, the more dangerous the math becomes. They tell us the courtroom is the great equalizer, a place where race, class, and power don't matter, where 12 ordinary citizens stand between you and the full weight of the state. But what happens when those 12 citizens are never allowed to look like you? What happens when justice on paper is stripped away by injustice in practice? This is the story of the jury box, how it was built as a shield but turned into another weapon. After the Civil War, America promised something radical. Not only freedom from slavery, but equal protection under the law. That meant, in theory, black men could serve on juries. Imagine the symbolism, once enslaved, now judging the very laws that once chained them. But that vision terrified white lawmakers. Almost immediately, states found ways to keep black jurors out. Poll taxes, literacy tests, character requirements, all designed to shrink the pool until it looked exactly like it did before emancipation. White male unquestioned. And yet, there were cracks in the wall. In 1879, a black man named Taylor Strawder challenged his exclusion from a jury in West Virginia. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in Strawder versus West Virginia, The court declared that excluding men from juries solely because they were black violated the 14th Amendment. On paper, this was a victory. But in reality, the court left open loopholes big enough to drive a wagon through. States could still manipulate how juries were drawn, who was qualified, and what neutral reasons prosecutors gave keep black citizens out. The law said one thing. The courtroom did another. Fast forward to 1931. Alabama. 9 black teenagers, falsely accused of assaulting 2 white women, are hauled into court. Their trials move at lightning speed, some lasting just one day. All white juries. No real defense. Death sentences handed down like routine paperwork. The case of the Scottsboro boys became a national scandal, exposing the sham of Southern justice. Appeals dragged on for years, reaching the Supreme Court multiple times. Each time, the court admitted the boys' rights were violated, but each time, Alabama retried with the same script. Nearly all white juries, predetermined guilt, a courtroom theater with lives hanging in the balance. The lesson was clear. When you control the jury box, you control the outcome. By the 1950s and 60s, the fight to integrate juries became part of the broader civil rights struggle. In Mississippi, activists exposed how county clerks simply lost black juror applications. In Alabama, black citizens who tried to serve were threatened or fired from their jobs. Even when federal courts intervened, the change was glacial. Jury service, meant to symbolize citizenship, became another battlefield where the promise of equality was delayed, denied, and destroyed. You might think this history belongs in dusty textbooks. But let me bring you to Mississippi, not 1930, but 1996. A man named Curtis Flowers is accused of murder. He is tried not once, not twice, but 6 times by the same prosecutor. Each time, the evidence grows thinner, and each time, the prosecutor strikes nearly every black juror from the pool. A black man in Mississippi, accused of a crime in a small town. He was tried not once, not twice, but 6 separate times over the course of 2 decades. Each trial ended with prosecutors systematically striking black jurors. Their reasons? One juror wore sunglasses. Another knew the defendant's family. Another looked inattentive. On paper, those reasons sound neutral. But in reality, they stacked all white juries in a majority black county. Think about that. In a county where most residents were black, this man was repeatedly judged by juries that looked nothing like him, chosen in ways designed to erase people who did. Over the course of Flowers' trials, this prosecutor used peremptory challenges, supposedly race-neutral, to eliminate 41 of 42 black potential jurors. Think about that. 6 trials, 23 years. A man's life suspended between prison and freedom because one prosecutor understood a simple truth. Control the jury, control the verdict. The Supreme Court finally overturned Flowers' conviction in 2019, citing blatant racial discrimination in jury selection. But the damage was already done. 2 decades stolen. And Curtis Flowers is not an exception. He is a mirror. The weapon? Peremptory strikes. This little legal tool allows attorneys to remove potential jurors without giving a reason. In theory, it's about fairness. In practice, it became Jim Crow in a suit and tie. Lawyers didn't have to say, "We don't want black jurors." Instead, they said, "That man looked nervous," or "That woman seemed biased," or "That person lives in the wrong neighborhood." The Supreme Court in Batson v. Kentucky, 1986, said prosecutors couldn't strike jurors just because of race. But all prosecutors had to do was come up with race-neutral excuses, and courts almost always accepted them. The results are devastating. In Louisiana, studies show black jurors are struck at 3 times the rate of white jurors. In North Carolina, the number is 2.5 times higher. In Alabama, counties with majority black populations still see majority white juries. The system doesn't even pretend to be blind. Here's why this matters. Juries decide life and death. They decide whether police are held accountable. They decide whether the prison door swings open or shut. When juries are stacked white, the outcomes follow. Conviction rates rise. Death sentences increase. And mass incarceration expands its reach. feeding millions of black bodies into the prison pipeline. What was supposed to be a shield protecting citizens from the state becomes another arm of the state itself, a jury box that looks neutral but is rigged from the inside. The courtroom was supposed to be sacred, a place where the community stood between you and raw state power. But for Black America, the jury box became another lock gate, and if the scales of justice tilt against you inside the courtroom, what happens outside, on the open road, where law enforcement meets your daily life? They said freedom came in 1865, but freedom with no land, no protection, and no right to move without suspicion. Was it really freedom? From vagrancy laws that turned walking into a crime, to traffic stops that turned headlights into death sentences, black mobility has always been policed. And when movement was restricted, something else was stolen too: land. Land that should have been passed down for generations vanished. This is how the system turned roads and acres into weapons. When the chains of slavery were cut, new chains were forged out of laws. They were called black codes. On paper, they criminalized vagrancy, loitering, and idleness. In practice, they criminalized being black and free. Imagine, a man walks home from church without proof of employment. Police arrest him. He's fined, but he can't pay. So, the state leases him to a plantation owner or a railroad company. A free man re-enslaved by law. These weren't isolated cases. Whole counties built their economies on convict leasing. Alabama's mines, Georgia's railroads, Florida's turpentine camps. They all thrived on black bodies arrested for moving the wrong way at the wrong time. Chain gangs, swinging sledgehammers under the hot sun, were the new slave fields. Mobility itself was dangerous. Moving, traveling, even standing still could end in arrest. Fast forward. Today, the most common interaction between black Americans and police isn't on foot. It's on the road. Traffic stops. The Stanford Open Policing Project analyzed over 100 million stops across the United States. Their findings? Black drivers are 20% more likely to be pulled over than white drivers, often for pretextual reasons. A broken taillight, rolling a stop sign, looking suspicious. But here's the kicker. One stop, black drivers are searched 1.5 to 2 times more often, even though contraband is found on white drivers at a higher rate. In other words, suspicion is racialized, not factual. And the cost? Sometimes it's just humiliation. Sometimes it's death. Philando Castile knew this better than anyone. In his short life, he was stopped 49 times by Minnesota police. 49 times for minor issues: broken lights, seatbelt checks, expired registration. He paid fines, took days off work, lived under constant watch. And then, one day, one of those stops turned deadly. A traffic stop became his execution. When police control the road, mobility itself is a gamble. But these stops aren't just about safety. They're about money. In 2014, the Department of Justice investigated Ferguson, Missouri, after the police killing of Michael Brown. What they found was damning. The city had built its budget on tickets, fines, and fees, most of them extracted from black residents. Emails showed city officials pressuring police to write more tickets to fill budget gaps. Broken taillight? Pay up. Driving uninsured? Pay more. Can't pay? Warrant issued. Warrant means jail. Jail means your job, your home, maybe even your children. Gone. This wasn't policing. It was taxation without representation, enforced with a gun. So roads became traps. Black life became collateral for city revenue. But the war on mobility wasn't just about roads. It was about land. In 1910, black families owned 14% of all farms in America, a staggering accomplishment considering emancipation was just 2 generations old. Land meant independence. Land meant power. Land meant wealth that could be passed down. But by the end of the 20th century, that number dropped to less than 2%. How? Not by chance. By theft. One of the main weapons was called heirs property law. If a black landowner died without a will, the land passed informally to children and grandchildren. On paper, dozens of people might own small shares of the same farm. Developers swooped in, bought one relative's share. then forced the entire family into a court-ordered sale. Land worth millions sold for pennies at auction. Families who have farmed the soil for a century lost everything in a single gavel strike. This didn't happen in whispers. It happened in daylight. On Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, once home to Gullah Geechee families who preserved African traditions, thousands of acres were stripped away through partition sales. Today, Hilton Head is a resort playground for the wealthy. For the descendants of those families, it's exile. In North Carolina and Georgia, entire black farming communities saw their land vanish in courtrooms. Developers built highways, malls, and golf courses where black children once played. Even the federal government played its part. For decades, the USDA systematically discriminated against black farmers, delaying loans, denying assistance, pushing families into foreclosure. This led to a landmark case, Pigford versus Glickman. In 1999, the government admitted wrongdoing and promised $1 billion in settlements. But by then, the damage was done. Generations of wealth had already been stolen. The promise of 40 acres and a mule shattered. The reality was closer to zero. So what's the connection? From chain gangs to traffic stops, black mobility has always been criminalized. From heirs' property to USDA discrimination, black land has always been under siege. Together, they reveal the same pattern: controlling where black people can go and stripping away what they can own. Because movement is power, land is power, and systems built on racial hierarchy don't surrender power. They just rebrand the tools. If your car can be stopped and your land can be stolen, what about your very right to life? What about your body, your health, your water, your air? That's where the story goes next. Because Jim Crow didn't just steal votes, juries, and land. He set his sights on life itself. Hospitals, pollution, even the internet. These are the new front lines of Jim Crow, and the receipts are undeniable. They told us Jim Crow was dead, that the chains were broken, the whips discarded, and the signs that once screamed "whites only" were torn down. But what if the only thing that truly changed was a costume? Because today, instead of shackles, you find contracts. Instead of overseers, zoning boards. And instead of separate water fountains, poison pipes and digital dead zones. Jim Crow didn't vanish. He migrated into hospitals, neighborhoods, and even your Wi-Fi signal. Let's start with hospitals. Because for generations, the body itself has been the battlefield. In the Jim Crow South, black patients were turned away from white hospitals or sent to overcrowded, underfunded facilities with no equipment and barely trained staff. Black doctors were barred from practicing in white institutions. Even in emergencies, ambulance drivers would drive past black patients to deliver white ones first. And when black people were allowed through the doors, it was often not to be healed, but to be used. Take Tuskegee. For 40 years, from 1932 to 1972, the U.S. Public Health Service ran an experiment on hundreds of black men in Alabama. These men were told they were being treated for bad blood. In reality, they were deliberately left untreated for syphilis, even after penicillin became the cure. Doctors watched them go blind, go insane, pass the disease to their wives and children, all in the name of science. Tuskegee is infamous, but it's not unique. From J. Marion Sims, called a father of gynecology, who perfected his techniques by performing surgeries on enslaved black women without anesthesia, to routine medical testing on incarcerated black men. The message was clear. Black bodies were not sacred. They were raw material. Fast forward. The signs are gone, but the disparities remain. Black women in America today are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from childbirth than white women, regardless of income or education. Serena Williams, a global icon, nearly died after giving birth because doctors dismissed her pain. If she couldn't get heard, what chance does the average black mother in Mississippi or Louisiana have? COVID-19 peeled the scab back further. Black Americans died at nearly twice the rate of whites. Access to care, underlying conditions shaped by poverty, and yes, implicit bias from providers all played a role. And the bias isn't just anecdotal. Studies prove it. One found that half of medical students surveyed believe myths like Black people feel less pain. That false belief makes its way into treatment decisions. Black patients are less likely to be prescribed pain medication, less likely to be referred for advanced care, and more likely to be misdiagnosed. Health is life. And when the system withholds it, that's not an accident. That's design. Now, step outside the hospital doors. Because sometimes it's not the doctor who decides your fate. It's the air you breathe. Take Louisiana's Cancer Alley, an 85-mile stretch along the Mississippi River packed with more than 150 petrochemical plants. 90% of the residents are Black. Cancer rates there are some of the highest in the nation. Children grow up with inhalers as common as lunchboxes. Or Flint, Michigan. 2014. To cut costs, city officials switched the water supply to the Flint River. Residents complained the water smelled like bleach, looked like rust, and tasted like metal. Officials told them it was fine. But it wasn't fine. It was poisoned with lead. Tens of thousands of mostly Black residents drank it, bathed in it, cooked with it. Children were left with brain damage that will last a lifetime. Flint wasn't just a mistake. It was a decision to put budget savings above Black lives. And it wasn't the first. The Environmental Protection Agency's own studies have confirmed again and again. Hazardous waste sites, landfills, highways, chemical plants, they're far more likely to be placed near Black neighborhoods, not rich suburbs, not gated communities, Black neighborhoods. Environmental racism doesn't just shorten life, it strangles opportunity. Because who wants to buy a house in a neighborhood with poisoned soil and toxic air? Who wants to invest in schools where kids can't concentrate because of lead poisoning? And so the cycle continues. But maybe you're thinking, okay, healthcare, pollution, water, those are old battles. What about the future? Surely in the digital age, equality is possible. Think again. When high-speed internet began rolling out across America, many Black neighborhoods were skipped. Providers claimed it wasn't cost-effective. But maps tell a different story. Broadband flowed into white suburbs, while Black and brown neighborhoods remained in the slow lane. This wasn't just bad luck. It's digital redlining. The same logic that once drew red lines around Black neighborhoods on mortgage maps is now applied by tech companies deciding where to invest. The result? Children forced to do homework in McDonald's parking lots because it's the only place with free Wi-Fi. Families paying more for slower speeds simply because of their zip code. Job seekers unable to apply online. Entire communities locked out of the digital economy. It's not an inconvenience. It's the new literacy test. Because in the 21st century, access to information is power. And denying it keeps power exactly where it's always been. When you step back, the pattern is undeniable. Hospitals that neglect your body. Pipelines that poison your children. Broadband deserts that choke your future. These are not glitches in the system. They are the system. Jim Crow didn't vanish. He evolved. From whips and chains to contracts and zoning boards. From whites-only hospitals to racial disparities in maternal death. From segregated neighborhoods to toxic waste and poison pipes. From literacy tests to digital deserts. The names changed. The tools updated. But the result is the same. Black life devalued. Black future diminished. Machines don't die. They get upgraded. Jim Crow didn't end. He rebranded. If Jim Crow were alive today, he wouldn't burn crosses. He'd file contracts. He wouldn't stand in the schoolhouse door. He'd design broadband maps. He wouldn't wear a hood. He'd wear a suit. The methods change. The mission never does. So here's the truth. Jim Crow never died. He adapted from the prison cell to the jury box, from the traffic stop to the hospital bed, from the polluted neighborhood to the internet cable. The names have changed, but the game has not. And until we see these connections, history will keep repeating itself, not as a relic of the past, but as a blueprint for future. This is why stories matter, because silence is the soil where Jim Crow grows. If you learned something today, share this video. Subscribe to this channel for more untold stories, buried histories, and the truths the world tried to erase. Because if we don't name it, we can't fight it. And if we can't fight it, we'll keep living inside a ghost that never left.